Right, Maui Stick, what is your bad point?
Yeah, mine's pretty simple that I think it's pretty horrible that G2 aren't actually attending the upcoming major. The RMR system is I don't even really blame the system that badly because they lost to one win and they lost to Gamer Legion. But I guess what could have been nice is just them not having to play this. But I guess it's like we've been kind of talking about. Actually, that's kind of my ugly point. I'll skip all that whole part of it. But I'll bring it back to G2. So basically, just not seeing G2, a top 10 team at the major, is pretty much everything against what I would want for a major. I think that seeing every top 10 team at it seems essential for it and also just given the fact that we're not going to see Nico, Monacy, Hunter, I think that those three players in particular, not seeing them at a major is kind of why we want to watch majors. But I will zoom in even more on just Monacy because I think this guy has the possibility, has the chance to become an actually all-time great player based off of his trajectory so far, how good he looked under HooXi when HooXi first jumped into the team, and to see him robbed of a chance to play this would be his first one, right? So this would have been his first major, and for him not to have that chance, I hope he
No, he must have been at the last major, logically.
Wait, was he?
Yeah, because G2 was at the last major. They just didn't make it through the legend stage or whatever, right?
Yeah, they didn't make it to playoffs. Okay, yeah. So, I mean, I think this guy needs more and more reps because I think that he has a chance to actually become one of the best players ever. And really, that just stunts his growth in a way. And I also think that when you look at how well they played at Pro League, how they actually qualified for the fall finals, this seems like such an aberration that I also don't love accepting it, but some people are going to come back with they didn't qualify, so they don't deserve to be there. But given their most recent results, everything just stands against that. Like they were playoff, they beat Navi, they beat FaZe, they made it they beat Vitality at Blast. Like they've beaten all these elite teams, and yet they just didn't. They just got owned by, I guess, BO1s and a Gamer Legion team that seemed incredibly motivated.
What do you think of that topic? Listen, it was obvious someone was going to pick it for this show as one of the bad or ugly. So what do you think, Heku?
I do. To me, it feels like, obviously, like G2 not qualifying is horrible, but it feels like it's somehow also related to the format. It's easier for me to give examples of the Americas RMR because I will be honest, I was not watching the European one because I was too busy. There were just so many things happening in the Americas one. So I was mostly I open HOTV, open Twitter, I can scroll oh, G2 didn't qualify. Oof, I can things like that. But I feel like sometimes stronger teams can actually, maybe not really in the scenario of G2, but can actually have a harder path than the weaker teams, because if we're looking at for example at 9Z, yes, they had to play against 00 Nation, they had to play against Imperial, but they played best of ones, and that is the format where they can actually make an upset. That's the best chance they can actually do that. If it would be a best of 3, I'm not sure if they'll be able to do that. When it comes to, for example, complexity, they start the first best of one against the weaker team, the second one against the weaker team, and afterwards they need to win best of 3s against Liquid, 00 Nation, and Imperial, actually good teams. It kind of felt like for them, due to them having this, due to them considered a better team, they actually had a harder time, this harder path. Not really probably the thing that worked for G2, because they kind of lost best of 3s to teams that they were supposed to win against. But I wonder if they were just maybe underprepared. They were maybe Gamer Legion, things like that. I really hope that was not really the scenario, because otherwise it's just, at an RMR, you cannot have an attitude like that towards any team.
Yeah, one thing I would say about this that I find a bit strange is this topic always comes up because it's essentially the same topic as to when we had the online era, and when people like me are I don't really care about the results. People are yeah, but it's all that Counter-Strike is now, so it does matter, and if you are the best, you have to win. It's okay. So let's start with the one that Mouse Snake mentioned, which is the logic of but if they were that good, then why didn't they qualify? By that logic, by the way, I can justify the worst possible qualification system, because if you don't qualify, you weren't good enough, therefore you're not good enough to qualify. That's called circular logic. It doesn't actually make any sense. By that logic, if that's that's correct, that whoever qualifies is automatically deserving of it because that's what the qualification method is, then forget this current system. We're just going to have an enormous 128 team bracket that is going to be single elim, BO1, and we're going to play it all online. Because if you qualify, you were good enough, you deserve to, you qualified. And if you didn't, well, you're not obviously good enough, and whoever beat you, if they're a lesser team, they're actually not a lesser team. By the way, here's what they don't do, and this is where people are intellectual cowards. If they actually believe what they're saying, I'll give it to the idiots on HLTV. They're obviously not you, the people on the forums. They actually are right, at least, and consistent, which is if they believe this format does mean that the good teams always qualify, then they're right to say G2's shit, they should never have signed Hoxie, Nico's probably a bomb and should be fired, and Monacy just isn't good enough, because logically, they're just not as good a team as Gamer Legion. That's what you're saying if you believe the format. Except that's not the case at all, is it? Obviously, first of all, form on any given day is fleeting for everyone. Like, except, I mean, what's funny is the only team this year you wouldn't have said that about would have been Na'Vi until Pro League. After Pro League, even Na'Vi it counts for. Even they will like, if you don't know, when I was doing those bets, my biggest bet loss this year is because I put loads on Na'Vi to beat that dog shit NIP team when it ended up being the last match, and Na'Vi had already qualified, so they didn't even they just gave up the third map and lost it, right? Well, logically, does that mean NIP was good? NIP themselves immediately castrated the lineup and were like, Jesus! And then Na'Vi themselves weren't going like, this is fine, this is all brilliant. Like, that's an example of how form for anyone is fleeting. So what you do in the qualifying when you do this method is, it's how good you are on that day. That determines if you play in the World Championship. It's not really how good you are as a team. And then also there's another aspect. This is what, in my opinion, one of the biggest factors that made online play suck wasn't just the idea that it's online and no LAN and that. Those are big factors. It's also that you're thrown together, like those Snowsuit Snow Cups, people from totally different tiers. Now, if people don't know, there's a really famous saying that encapsulates this. It's the one where it says, if you are the greatest swordsman in the world, you don't fear the second greatest swordsman, you fear the man who has never held a sword. Because the premise goes, because he doesn't even know the rules of engagement and the meta of how you sword fight, he might just do something random that's wrong and just kill you outright. Like, he might just do a stab like that. You're like, what the hell? Straight in your eye. Like, you're expecting someone to start doing this and parrying. So basically, I think that's also what happens when you go to enormous RMRs like this and you play people you don't know and you don't practice against. Because there's another angle people forget. Not only when I'm a top 10 team am I basically spending all my time studying the top 10 teams, I'm practicing them. So that means my whole practice is how I play against the best teams with the best protocols, the best. So if I play teams you've never heard of and you've never scrimmed against, you don't have any info on them, they actually might play objectively worse, but that might work against you. It might even stylistically work. There's another angle people forget as well. Are we going to act like there's not teams? There's classic ones like this. There'll be a team that's like 11th in the world, but they always beat the number 3 team if they play them. They're not as good as the number 3 team, and they would never win a tournament like the number 3 team would. They're just a stylistic counter. Maybe the maps they play are the right ones. They have the right style. I mean, I think Outsiders has basically done this the last 2 months. They're clearly not an elite team, but I tell you what, there's a lot of elite teams that are like, fucking hell, have we just drawn Outsiders in the next game? Like, bloody hell, like, can't we just have some team that's better than them, but we could beat Ents or something, like, that's what they're even thinking of. So the mad thing is, I think there's all that as well. Then I'll throw this angle in, because by the way, on the whole angle of but if you were better, you would win. Lurpus actually made a point like this years ago that I thought just fell apart completely, but no one picked the holes in it, right? What he did was, because he was also looking at tournament formats, he went and he looked, and obviously the famous thing we all say is BO1's a little bit more random or has more variance, and it's like the underdog, like you said, Heku, can win more often in a BO1. And what Lurpus did, because this is the downside, he was just using his math background, and he didn't really think of the qualitative judgment. So what he did, as far as I know, is he went and took a few tournaments, and he just looked at whenever the favourite plays the underdog, do they win in a BO1 and do they win in a BO3? And at the end, the problem is the percentage of win rate of how many games they won was roughly the same for the matches, right? So his conclusion was, it doesn't matter. In BO1, actually, the better team wins about the same amount of times. Now, the problem with that is that was never the argument we were all making, because we're always making the argument when it's someone like G2, right? Let's be real. If everyone went through in the BO1s who was good, no one would give a fuck if it was BO1s, we'd go, great, whatever, it's less matches, just get the tournament done. But the argument you actually want to make, if you're talking to Lurpus in that scenario, is, I don't care about every team in the whole field playing BO1s. I want to know, for example, Maui Snake, when the top 5 teams in the world play a BO1, do they lose more often? And I think on that one, obviously I'm going from anecdotal evidence, I would say that's got to be enormously so. The difference is, you can beat Na'Vi in a BO1 when you would never in a million years beat them in a BO3. I think for that one, it has to be different. So I'll bring it back to the format a second. Because even though people are going to look at, like you said there, and they're going to go, but they lost to one win and then they lost to Gamer Legion. Yeah, wait a second. They lost to 1 win in, let's just go ahead and have a look. So they lost to 1 win in a BO1, correct?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
That's bad, but it's a BO1. And then they lost to Gamer Legion in a BO3. So my problem with that logic goes like this. Why does G2 get to have a harder path at certain times and just basically get 1 less life? Because here's what doesn't make any sense about this tournament if it was a real tournament. ESL would never do this. Blast would never do. They all seed their tournaments. If you seed your tournaments and you are G2 and you beat Ecstatic, you will never, ever possibly get Cloud9 as the next opponent. That is impossible. Cloud9 is also another top 6 team in the world. It would be impossible to ever draw them. Meanwhile, you go to the same round, so that's the 1-0 game, and you go, look who else is playing in that, right? NIP's playing Bad News Eagles. Spirit and Sprout are playing each other. Like, why do they get an easier opponent in the BO1 than G2? And then G2 plays a top team. That's 1 tournament life gone, guys. You have 3 tournament lives here. One of their tournament lives is burned just by the seeding. Because remember, the problem with this is, and I'm not saying it like we could change it because Valve's not going to change it apparently. Valve treats it like the major is its own unique thing and exists separate from the rest of the scene. And their logic really is how you do in the qualification determines if you get to play in the World Championship. I'm coming more from like a sports background. I think of it like tennis. It's like if you're like top 10 in the world, you don't start in like an open qualifier or something. You go to like a certain portion, you're like in the Grand Slam already, and then you see how you do. Yeah, you can still lose, but we want all the top players there in the top team, and then we decide who's the best. So theirs is more like you just qualify to the World Championship, then we see who's the best. I want it to be the best teams, and then we see who is the winner of the World Championship. Those are different things he's selecting for there, you notice. And then the one other thing I would say is this. I don't think this means G2 isn't good at all. Like, this is a blip on the radar for me. Yeah, the couple of these matches aren't that great. By the way, Gamer Legion 1 suddenly looks way better now, doesn't it? Because you go look who they played in this tournament. They were good in like every single match, and they qualified for the major. It'd be one thing if they lost to 1 win, and then 1 win just fucks off right out of the tournament. That's a different matter entirely. So I think on that whole topic, like, I think people have got really confused with some of that. And then also, I'll just say this is why in general, to me, it's obvious what you do is the next level up. Like, I already hate, like I said, randomized system of seeding for Swish. I hate the idea that it's even randomized in the next session. Like for example, in my opinion, the reason you seed it also is because when you win the BO1 and you're like FaZe Clan, you should play the worst team in the 1-0 match. That just seems obvious to me, but that's because I'm selecting for a different thing. So the other angle you could do is just make them all BO3s. This is what I'll say right now. As much as I'll complain about seeding, at the same time, if G2 loses 3 BO5s out of 5, BO3s out of 5, I said the wrong way. If they manage to play 5 BO3s and lose 3 of them, then I'm actually fine with them not making the major. Unless it was some really crazy scenario where they really drew like FaZe into Na'Vi into Vitality. Unless that happens, I could at least live with that. I could sleep in that scenario. This one, I am just going to think the whole time. But they're not shit though, are they? They like lost a very close game in this scenario. They never should have been playing Cloud9 anyway. And yeah, like that one sucks because the difference is you go and look at some of the other teams that qualify, like a Heku point she was saying, right? Here's how Sprout qualified. Remember, they're in the same RMR. They're in the other RMR. No, they're in the same RMR.
They're the same.
Right? So the problem is, we're doing the logic of like, well, Sprout, congratulations to you. You idiots in fucking G2. You're not even good enough, right? Sprout played Force, Spirit, best of 3 against FaZe, and then best of 3 against B8. Which is harder out of those.
This a joke.
You know what I mean? So in that scenario, you weren't both, like in that scenario, that's like one person swam a record time in like a 50-meter pool, and the other guy had an 80-meter pool to swim in, and he swam like the same time, and you're like, you failed. It's like, well, that pool was longer. So in that, I just want it to feel like it's a coherent approach. We all know what's going on. The good thing about the BO3 one, like I said, is even the players wouldn't complain if they lost in that. They would just go, okay, we weren't good enough. We'll win the BO3s next time. So whatever. There's my rant.
Yeah, but also I want to say kind of like the amount of preparation that, for example, like a stronger team has and a weaker one. Because if we're talking, for example, like G2, probably the moment they start preparing for Gamer Legion was the day before. Like, so
sure.
Like they find out their opponent, they start preparing from zero. They basically don't know anything. Gamer Legion, on the other hand, probably they've been watching their demos for like a few months. They probably have strats when they say like, hey, we're doing the G2 execute. They already know what to expect. So like the amount of preparation, which is usually has like a big influence on the outcomes. Like here it's like one of the reasons, again, like why an underdog can actually win just by this like fact.
Want to see more cool, funny, interesting clips based on topics from my content? Well, subscribe to this channel then, or, you know, be a pleb and don't.